Okay, we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we will be taking it's called the Ambalatthikarahulovada Sutta. This is Sutta number 61 in the Majjhima Nikaya, beginning on page 523. Okay, and this is the meaning of the sutta is the advice to Rahula at a place called Ambalatthika. Okay, who is Rahula? Anybody know? Anybody doesn't know? So Rahula was the Buddha's own physical son. And when the Buddha was still a prince living in the palace, then he was married according to the tradition at the age of 16. And somehow he and his wife didn't have any children until just when he was 29 years old. So for 13 years. And then just when he was going through this process of reflection of the unsatisfactory nature of life and pondering whether he should leave the worldly life in order to become an ascetic, his wife conceived, and then over time the pregnancy increased until, according to tradition, I don't know whether this is a real fact or not, but just when he made up his mind to renounce the worldly life, she gave birth to the child. And then it said that he gave the child the name Rahula with the meaning of fetter or bond, because the idea is that having given birth to a child, now this little child is acting as a bond on him, a kind of bond or fetter of the heart, compelling him or pressuring him to remain in the worldly life and not to renounce. I don't really know how the word Rahula gets the meaning of fetter, since it seems to be based on the name Rahula, which is supposed to be a kind of demon that swallows up the moon. Maybe it was the ancient Indian way of representing the lunar eclipse. So anyway, the tradition explains the name Rahula to mean fetter. And yet the Buddha made the decision, even though his wife had just given birth to this baby, he made the decision to leave the household life. And according to tradition, on the very night that he decided to renounce, when his wife and the newborn baby were lying in the bed, in the middle of the night, he got up and he went to the door of their chamber, bed chamber, and he opened the door, and then he looked back one final time at his wife and child sleeping on the bed. Perhaps his heart was torn with indecision. Should I go back? Should I leave? Should I go back? Should I leave? But then he decided to leave, and the rest is history. But then, after his quest for enlightenment took 6 years. And then shortly after his enlightenment, when he began to teach, as his reputation spread, the Sakyans heard that their own offspring, the Prince Siddhartha, has now become the famous teacher known as the Buddha. And so they invited him to come back to the capital of the Sakyan Republic, Kapilavatthu. And so the Buddha came back and visited the city. And as he was walking down the street, together with the community of monks, his former wife and the child were looking out the window of the palace. And then his wife pointed him out to Rahula and said, "Rahula, do you know who that is?" And Rahula said, "No, I don't." Then the wife said, "That is your father." And then she said to Rahula, "Go to him and ask him for your inheritance." Maybe she had in mind to receive, the wealth of the kingdom. Well, it wasn't a kingdom, it was a republic, but the wealth of their aristocratic family. And so Rahula went up to the Buddha and said, "Father, please give me my inheritance." Then the Buddha paused and thought, should I give him a worldly inheritance, just wealth that will just eventually decay and vanish? Or should I give him the deathless inheritance, the path to nirvana? And so then the Buddha turned to Sariputta and said, "Ordain him." And so the Buddha's disciple Sariputta ordained Rahula, and in this way Rahula became, at the age of 7, became a novice monk. Okay, and so when this sutta opens, apparently Rahula is still a little boy, still just a young novice. And so here the Buddha wants to give Rahula a little lesson in a basic ethical point. Perhaps it was the case that Rahula, as a little boy, thought that it would be, like there's a habit with little boys, thought it would be fun to speak falsehoods, to tell lies, to mislead people in order to be able to laugh at them when they believed his lies. Okay, so Rahula, the Buddha goes to Rahula while he's living at this grove, probably very close to the bamboo grove. And then Rahula prepares a seat for him, and so on, and then pays homage to him and sits down. And now the Buddha, very, very skillfully, is going to use a practical device, a practical method to teach Rahula the lesson that he wants to impart to him. And the point of his lesson is going to be the importance of maintaining truthful speech. Okay, so Rahula sets up some water for the Buddha to wash his feet. So the Buddha washes his feet, and then he leaves a little bit of water in the vessel. Then he asks Rahula, "Do you see this little bit of water left in the vessel?" And Rahula says, "Yes." Then the Buddha says, even so little, Rahula, is the it's a little difficult to understand here, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. What's meant by recluseship here, you would say, is, maybe you could put it more freely, the value of the spiritual life for one who is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. But since Rahula is now a little ascetic, a little renunciant, so the Buddha phrases his point in terms of recluseship. Okay, so there's a little water left in the vessel, and in the same way, one who is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie has just a little bit of spirituality left in him. Okay, then the Buddha throws away the little bit of water that was left and says, do you see how that little bit of water was thrown away? And Rahula says, yes. So then the Buddha says, in the same way, in just that way, the recluseship or spirituality has been thrown away of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Okay, then the third example, the Buddha turns the water vessel upside down and says, do you see how this vessel has been turned upside down? And then Rahula says, yes. And the Buddha says, in the same way, those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie have turned their recluseship or their spiritual life upside down. Okay, then the fourth step, the Buddha turns the vessel upright again and then points out to Rahula that the water vessel is now empty. And then the Buddha makes the point that in the same way, the spirituality or recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie becomes hollow and empty. Okay, so these are four similes, all based on the example of the water vessel that the Buddha uses to convey to Rahula the importance of speaking the truth. Okay, now the Buddha gives another simile, and this one is a little bit problematic. I'm in paragraph 7 now. The Buddha says, suppose there were a royal tusker elephant with tusks, long tusks. It's a very powerful elephant that's used in battle. And so in battle it would perform its task with its forefeet, with its hind feet, with its forequarters, hindquarters, with his head and his ears, with his tusks and his tail. Yet he would keep back his trunk. Okay, in this case, his rider would think that the elephant, the royal tusker elephant, even though he's willing to exert himself in battle, yet he's still holding back. He's not yet really fully surrendered himself to his task. But when that elephant performs his task with every part of his body, even with his trunk, then the rider would think that now this tusker elephant is even ready to give up his life for the sake of battle, for winning the battle. Now there's nothing that this royal tusker elephant would not do. And so then the Buddha now draws out the point of the simile. So too, Rahula, when one is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there is no evil, I say, that one would not do. Therefore, you should train thus. I will not utter a falsehood, even as a joke. Okay, the reason why I say that this last simile is a little bit problematic. Maybe does anybody have any idea of why I say that it's problematic? When the elephant is ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of the battle, what would the king think of that elephant or the rider?
I would think of a liar as one who just uses part of himself. That the elephant is using all of himself. It doesn't suggest someone telling a lie.
Yeah, that's so, but maybe it's not exactly what I was thinking.
You were thinking it endangered the one riding elephant? Is that just...
No, it's really not. It's pretty simple.
The elephant is trained in a positive way.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Yeah, if the elephant is ready to sacrifice himself, even to use his trunk in the battle, then one would evaluate that as a really worthy, admirable elephant. Whereas somebody is willing to speak a deliberate falsehood, or somebody is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, then we would rate that person negatively. So that's why I say it seems a little bit strange. Yeah, please.
When you read it, I took the other meaning. I thought withholding the trunk meant withholding the truth. You're still holding on to some form of ego, selfishness, and the surrender of offering everything is the surrender of always offering the truth, no matter what the consequences. That's how I took it.
I saw it the other way that I explained, and the way that this gentleman in the back. So
I saw it as a sense of restraint, and then by withholding the trunk, you maintain some sort of self-awareness, and then let it go, you sort of lose all sense of control.
yeah, maybe that is the way in which the simile works. But there still seems to be a little bit of a tension here, since, at least the way I see it, that from the standpoint of a military, or king, or the general in charge of the army, the elephant that's willing to even to use its trunk, doesn't spare any part of its body, would be considered admirable, the best elephant to use in battle. Whereas the person who is willing to tell a deliberate lie, not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, is one that we would rate negative. Yeah, I want to go over some of the points that come out from Buddhist texts and also from my own reflection on the importance of telling the truth. First, I think it's, even though this text is speaking solely about avoiding speaking falsehood, about not telling a deliberate lie, but other texts analyze speaking falsehood in terms of the motivation. Maybe the classical text that's repeated in many suttas on speaking falsehood, we'd find an example of it in Sutta number 41. This is on page 380. In paragraph 9, which begins at the end of at the bottom of the page. Here the Buddha is explaining 4 kinds of verbal conduct that are not in accordance with the Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. And the first of these is speaking falsehood. So the example given is that when one is summoned to a court or to a meeting, to his relatives' presence, or to his guild, or to the royal family's presence, and questioned as a witness thus, tell what you know. Not knowing, he says, I know, or knowing, he says, I do not know. Not seeing, he says, I see, or seeing, he says, I do not see. In full awareness, he speaks falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some trifling, worldly end. And so it seems in the suttas which single out false speech or the suttas which are defining false speech as a type of unrighteous conduct, what is singled out for special mention is the falsehood which takes place when one bears false witness. That is, when one is committing, in effect, what is perjury. And the reason why one is speaking falsehood in this, according to this passage, one is doing so for one's own ends or for another's ends. Those are the two main reasons. One is doing so to secure some benefit for oneself or some benefit for somebody else, maybe somebody who is close to you, like a relative or friend. And then what's added is for some trifling, worldly end. I don't know what specifically could be intended by that. But anyway, this is, in the suttas, the classical description of false speech. Other texts explain the different motivations that lie behind false speech. And these are usually given in terms of the three unwholesome roots. So there can be false speech which is motivated by greed. This is when one speaks falsehood to gain some benefit for oneself or for those who are close to oneself, to gain wealth, position, respect, admiration, praise, so on. Okay, then there is false speech which originates from hatred or ill will. This is where one tells a malicious lie. That is when one lies in order to hurt others, to damage others, maybe to ruin the good standing, good reputation of others, to break up friendships, or to embarrass or humiliate others. And then the third motivation for lying is delusion. And I'm just trying to think of some examples of delusion. One might be the irrational lie. Somebody who doesn't really have a very clear reason for lying, but just becomes a habitual or compulsive liar. There are some people who just feel a constant compulsion to lie, even though there's no clear driving motivation for the lie. It just becomes a habitual way of life with them. And then another type of lie arising from delusion. I don't know, other examples don't come to mind. Anybody else have any ideas? What could be? Please.
Well, I don't have an idea about that, but I wondered how it meshes with compassion. Some lies. Somebody says, oh, my granddaughter said recently, I'm the smartest. And I thought, well, you're not really the smartest.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or yeah. I'm ugly. You don't want to say, yeah, you're ugly. So I wonder how compassion blends in with some kinds of...
Yeah, this is actually something that I plan to come into.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay, but it's something that I was going to get to. But just to take some examples of what might be considered lies springing from delusion. Yeah.
Most people lie because they think it will do more good. Don't worry, there's no radiation from Fukushima. The water's safe. That's coming from a delusional point of view. Governments lie to people out of certain, I think, delusional motivations to prevent panic, things like that.
Yeah, though in this case, I would say that the government knows the truth. It could be lying in order to delude people.
For their own good.
It could be for the people's own good.
As it were, yeah. Putting quotes about that, I think.
Then we come to this point that Dina just raised about lying, which might be motivated by compassion, which is the point that I want to come to. I'm trying to think of more examples of lies that might be motivated by delusion.
People do persuade themselves that a lie is the truth.
Yeah.
I once dated the son of a general who said that his father persuaded himself that it was absolutely true that we had to fight in Vietnam. That we crossed a line from a deliberate lie to actually believing the lie is the truth.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Yeah. In fact, I had that under a different heading that I wanted to cover in speaking about falsehood and obligation to speak the truth. Yeah, I wanted to sort of explore some of the reasons that underlie the stricture against lying. Okay, I just came up with a few reasons. Maybe in discussion we could add some more. One is that lying is disruptive of social cohesion. Like in order for any kind of social unit to hold together harmoniously and to avoid disruption, what's necessary is for people to have trust in one another. And so, as long as we can have some confidence that in our communications we are hearing the truth from others, and as long as others could have some confidence that they are hearing the truth from us, then we have reasons for cooperating, collaborating, and holding together into a harmonious and successfully functioning society. But when people start to speak falsehood, well, first at the individual level, if one sees that a person is repeatedly speaking falsehood, then how do you relate to that person? What's the natural reaction when that person tells you something important? You don't trust them, yeah. And now if this spreads throughout the society, then the kind of trust that serves as the glue or cement that holds society together, that gets shattered, and we fall into a state of kind of survival of the fittest, where we're willing to use any kind of deception, falsehood, lies, in order to advance ourselves or those that are dear to us, and to harm and injure others. And for this reason, I would say that responsibility for speaking the truth falls most heavily upon those in positions of authority. And so when those in positions of power and authority are known to speak falsehood, then the sense of trust breaks down to the whole social order, and the feeling spreads that if they're entitled to lie, I too can tell a lie. Since, if they're so important in such powerful positions, and they're telling lies, then a small fry like myself, if I tell lies, it's not really so significant. And so I think this is almost a situation that we're coming to in this country now, when we find out that, especially the way major corporations spread falsehoods. I remember years ago when reports were coming out about the connection between cigarette smoking and lung cancer and heart disease. The tobacco companies tried to hide all of the evidence and to spread falsehood that there's no connection, that there's just a chance connection between smoking and lung cancer. And now it's the connection between carbon emissions and global warming. The powerful petroleum corporations, coal corporations. They try to cover up all of the evidence. They set up their own, quote, research councils, their own websites to spread the misleading or disinformation, trying to throw question marks around the connection between carbon emissions and global warming. Okay, so that's in corporations, and in politics also. We find that it's very difficult to find politicians who are people of real integrity, who don't flip-flop, change their positions in order to suit the mood of the people that they're trying to win over. And so in order to restore social harmony, it's important to find real people of real integrity who are willing to speak the truth and to hold to the truth, even when it means going against powerful vested interests, when it means going against popular opinion. Okay, so one reason for the stricture against lying is that it's necessary to preserve mutual trust between people, and in this way to protect social harmony. Another reason, on a more personal level, is that lies tend to proliferate. Like if one tells one lie, then sometimes one could get away with it. But if somebody suspects one of having told a lie and then challenges one, then in order to defend yourself and protect yourself, you have to tell another lie. And then in order to keep the story coherent, to keep that lie intact, then you have to tell still another lie, and then another lie, and another lie, until you become just completely enclosed in a web of lies. In my own personal experience, there was one incident that took place in my childhood that always remains quite clear in my memory. On a shop in 13th Avenue in Brooklyn, no, it was 12th Avenue, not so far from my family home. In the shop window, there was a set with a pen and a pencil, pen and pencil set. And each time I would pass it, I would look at the pen and pencil set, and it was just so enticing. I don't remember how old I was, maybe about 8 years old. Barely knew how to write, but seeing a pen and pencil set with these bright colors, it was a kind of paisley pattern of colors, and it was so attractive. And then I noticed that my mother, I'm ashamed to say this, left her pocketbook on the counter in the kitchen. And I saw the price tag for the pen and pencil set. And one day I couldn't resist, when my mother was out or in another room, I couldn't resist opening the pocketbook and seeing that there was enough money to buy the pen and pencil set. And so at that time I wasn't an ordained Buddhist monk with the precept not to steal. But I was just a little boy, easily tempted. And so, looking around, Mom's in the other room, out comes the $5 bill, or could be $2, I don't remember, into the pocket. And then later that day, I'm off to the corner shop to buy a pen and pencil set and bring it back. But then, my parents saw the pen and pencil set and asked me, where did you get the money to buy the pen and pencil set? I think I might have told them, I don't remember the exact reason, but hypothetically I might have said, Grandma gave me the money. Which was a bit foolish because Grandma was living just upstairs. So I think it could have been that evening when Mom and Dad sitting with rather stern expression on their face. Just like the Buddha calling Rahula. Called me in and said, Jeffrey, sit down, we want to speak to you. You said you got the money to buy that pen and pencil set from Grandma, but we asked Grandma and she said she didn't give you any money. So where did you get the money from? So then shamefully I had to tell them the truth. And then they told me something that really stuck in my mind throughout my whole life. They said, stealing is bad. It's something you shouldn't do. But what you did after that is even worse. What you did was to tell a lie in order to cover up your bad act. And so then they stressed to me the importance of telling the truth. So I've always remembered that. So, unfortunately, in my teenage years, I would steal little things from shops. But I probably told lies also. But it remained clearly in my mind that I should not tell a lie in order to cover up other bad acts. Okay, so the second reason for abstaining from lying is that lies come to proliferate until we find ourselves, locked in a cage of lies. The third reason is that over time we come to believe our own lies. And so we lose a sense of what's real and what's imaginary. That division between the two breaks down. And so I think this is the case of what happens with habitual liars. Somebody who tells lies, boastfully in order to boost his own status, stories about his adventures in India and Africa, South America, when he never left Brooklyn. But after a while, he comes to believe these. And so he maybe has like a swollen sense of ego, of self-importance, because he's been telling a lot of lies in order to boost his standing in the eyes of others. And so he gets swollen up and completely deceived, deceiving himself by his own falsehoods. And often we could we develop a certain sensitivity towards people like that. So when we come across people who are habitual liars, maybe not immediately, but after a little while we can tell that they're liars. And then we develop a distrust towards them. Okay, then there's another reason that I think the Buddha puts so much emphasis on truthful speech. And this is because what I see is a certain parallelism or correspondence between truthful speech and wisdom. Like the function of wisdom, according to the Buddha's teaching, is to see and know things as they really are. And the function of truthful speech is to communicate the way things really are. So if we are going to develop wisdom, the insight into the nature of things as they really are, then we have to build up a kind of subjective foundation for that by, in our speech, describing things as they really are. So we could say that wisdom and truthful speech are respectively the inner and outer manifestations of a commitment to reality. And when we make this commitment to truthful speech, this establishes a correspondence between our own inner being and the nature of reality or actuality. And so by establishing that correspondence, then truthful speech contributes to the growth and development of wisdom. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why I would say that Buddhism places so much emphasis on truthful speech. But now a certain problem comes up. Some of the questions or comments earlier were pointing in this direction. And that is, the question comes up, are there ever occasions when speaking falsehood is permissible or even necessary? And this is an interesting problem because this is my complaint against the suttas, that one doesn't find in the suttas, at least to my knowledge, examples brought up or cases brought up where there is a conflict of moral obligations, where there are two sort of moral obligations which on certain occasions are not compatible. To give an example of this, different from that of truthful speech, say a farmer has taken the 5 precepts not to take life, and yet in order to plow his field, inevitably he's going to be harming, injuring living beings, the beings that live in the ground. So when we think that a farmer who's taken the 5 precepts might have some inner struggle, how can I plow my field in order to grow food, to provide for my family, and to earn a living, and yet uphold the precept to avoid taking life, even though he's not sort of deliberately singling out creatures to kill, but he knows when he's plowing the field that creatures are going to be killed. And yet we don't see in the suttas examples where a farmer might come to the Buddha and present him with that moral dilemma. And similarly, there are cases where there seems to be a conflict between the obligation to speak the truth and some other moral obligation. To take maybe a very clear case, during the period when the Nazis came to power in Germany and the years of World War II, there were families in some of the countries, well, in Germany itself and some of the other countries conquered by the Nazis, in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Holland, which would hide Jewish people, in special rooms that they would build, and attics and basements, and keep them there. And when sometimes, I guess, the Nazi inspectors would come around checking to see if there are any Jews, and they would have to ask the family, have you seen or do you know of the presence of any Jewish people around here? Okay, if the families which are protecting the Jewish people speak the truth, say we have to speak the truth, and say yes, there are some Jewish people in our basement or in the attic, then they know that's the end of them. They'll be gathered, sent off to the concentration camp, and most likely obliterated. And so here there's a conflict of ethical obligations, and it seems almost overwhelmingly certain that the obligation to protect the lives of others has a greater claim on our allegiance, in that case, then the obligation to speak the truth. You shake your head this way.
Maybe I'm a better liar. I would say, I saw jewels a couple of days ago. I do not see them now. It's absolutely true, deceiving. Yes, I saw them a couple of days ago, but I'm not seeing them as of now. One day from now on, you will not believe me.
What is that?
I'm deceiving them with a good heart, but I am not telling lie at all.
You're going to come and clean up my room after the class? I have to keep an eye on you.
Watch your wallet.
If they ask you, is any Jews living in your house, or have you living with them? How are you going to defend this matter?
I didn't lie.
No, how do you say this? Oh no, they lived with me a couple of days ago, but now they're not living in this house. But they asked you they are in the basement or in the attic.
I said, now I don't see them.
But we don't say see or not see. How about live with them, or you hiding them, or you keep them?
Yeah, the question could be phrased in a way that wouldn't allow you to.
Right. So what situation allow you to protect you, not really to lie, also have the wisdom way to protect others? That is the key. That's what I feel sometimes. How we solve that in a certain situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of things we developed with the reality and the sutras, I found some kind of conflictions there, but...
Some kind of...
Conflict,
yeah.
Should I follow the sutra, or should I do something? How I develop this one become the wisdom? I had a problem with that.
Oh.
And will this kind of wisdom be accepted by this reality we live, or by the sutra that time we live? I found that's a hard part.
Yeah.
And then for me to not to do this so, because I follow the sutra, but for other people in this reality, for that they don't see it as the truth.
I think some people have some comments to comment on your comment.
Yes. I hear right now our discussion, we use a microscope to look at the detail.
You use the what? The microscope to look at detail, yeah.
Or magnify to look at detail. If we stay back, we see the whole situation.
Yeah.
If I say, I do not see these people.
I do not
see these people. I say people. I say Jewish. And I prevent these people, kill people.
Yeah.
It's good deed.
It's
good deed.
Yeah, I see, yeah.
Right? So I think it's really, I don't think it's violate anything.
Yeah.
Maybe sacrifice myself,
Yeah.
I'll say more people.
Yeah. Okay, first, then we take Andrea, and then, I see you have it. Okay, so David, you speak.
It's really the intent of the lie that's what's important.
I think that's extremely
important. Not the lie itself.
I think that's extremely important point.
If you ask the doctor, am I going to die? And the doctor wants to protect you for some period of time for some good reason. He says, no, I think you'll be fine. That's a different kind of a lie.
Yeah, and I think that's where compassion, as Dina brought up before, comes in. I say that there are, even though the texts speak about how lies are motivated by greed, hatred, or delusion, but it seems to me that in some cases there are lies which are motivated by compassion.
Yeah, good reason.
And I don't think somebody can argue that, if you say that there are compassionate grounds for lying, then you're encouraging the unrestrained multiplication of falsehood. I don't think that's the case. It's not very convincing to me.
There's also a situation where the person doesn't realize that they're lying. That story about the sky is falling. Chicken Licken running around telling everybody the sky is falling because he's hit on the head by an acorn. He doesn't realize that he's lying.
I would say that's not really a lie. That's when it's saying something which is not true, but I say that lying implies intention. If there's no intention to communicate something falsely, it's not a lie. And then, Drea.
I personally feel if one has any sort of moral backbone, one knows what is right and what is wrong. It's rather simple. You protect the person hiding from the Nazis. You protect the runaway slave in the underground railroad. Or there are many other sorts of situations. And to go through, well, I'm not really lying, is the worst sort of moral equivocation.
To go through...
To say, well, if I say this, it's not really a lie. It's the worst form of moral equivocation. And it's a form of false scrupulosity. Which really, I've been going nuts here, with that. It's sometimes I just think it's just a simple thing: what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. Not do I have to go look in the book? I mean, if you want to take the Holocaust example, there's a book about you know about the Book of Life, where people who saved Jews are put in Israel, right, the righteous. Some of these people weren't so righteous. There was one family which took this woman in very reluctantly. But they did take her in. They didn't betray her. But the grandmother was worried about this and actually had to go to the priest. Are you sure we're doing right, even though she's a filthy, dirty, rotten yid? And the priest said, yes, you're doing right.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't believe they made it into the Book of the Righteous. I mean, just barely. But to have to be told by some authority figure or go to the book, I think personally, got a real problem.
So basically I'm in agreement with that. There are instances where one gets a very clear, intuitive moral sense of what is right and what is wrong. I say also that there are some people who have a professional commitment to speak falsehood, and speaking falsehood is necessary to protect large numbers of people. People working in, maybe I'll get some eggs thrown at me, but somebody working in the CIA.
You do have to be killed.
Excuse me?
You do have to keep it secret. They can be
Yeah,
killed.
exactly, and you have to put out like a false identity.
Undercover officer.
Yeah. I mean, it's not always done with bad intentions. So. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring out that there are cases where it seems that there are other moral obligations sort of trump the obligation to speak the truth. So what I would say is that other things being equal, if there's no other overriding moral obligation, then we're under an obligation to speak the truth.
I just had one question. You said something. You said, this is where I have trouble with the Sutra.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't... It's possible to have...
Wait. Take the microphone.
You mentioned that this was a place where this is a point where you had a problem with the Sutra.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mention these things. But conceivably, you could have problems anywhere along the line with the Sutras. And how do you know when to believe it and accept it and when to question it?
I mean, that's a big question that maybe I shouldn't try to go into right now. But some of the comments now answer the point that you brought up. Yeah.
It's quite similar to what you mentioned about if there is a problem, have a conflict, how are we going to follow? And just like you mentioned the previous questions, what did you say?
I said, how do you decide? How do you decide whether to believe and follow or not? A question.
And things that can go just really have problem to.
I don't want to get into such a big question, but just to keep it focused on the question of where there's a conflict of moral obligations. And here I think one has to have what I would call an intuitive reliance upon one's own intuition about what is right, what is wrong. under the circumstances in which one finds oneself. Like the farmer who has to plow the field in order to grow crops and feed his family. I mean, he'll understand that these are sort of like the limitations placed on him, that he can't abstain from taking life perfectly, 100%, but he does his best. Okay, now I want to go back to the sutta. Okay, then just taking the last sentence in paragraph 7, or the next to last sentence, the Buddha says to Rahula, when one is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there is no evil, I say, that one would not do. Again, this seems like a strong statement. And I would suppose that the Buddha is making a statement like that under particular circumstances that we don't fully know, because they're part of the context under which the sutta was given. I don't know whether that could be taken as, just point blank, as a generalization that we should always adhere to. In fact, there's an interesting case in the Ambalatthika Sutta. This is Sutta number 86 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is on page 714 in the middle-length discourses. Probably many of you know the story of Angulimala. In the earlier part of his life, he had been a terrible, what we would call a serial killer, who would kill many, many people, and whenever he would kill them, he would cut off one of their fingers, dry it up till only the bone remains, and then he put together a necklace of the bones of their fingers. And so he was the most feared serial killer in this part of North India. But the Buddha went into the forest where he was living, transformed him, and then Angulimala became a Buddhist monk. And then he became very well-disciplined, very admirable monk. Eventually he reached arhatship. Okay, now one day, Angulimala was going on alms round in the town of Savatthi, and then he saw a woman who was having a difficult childbirth. And then Angulimala returned to the Buddha and reported what he saw. And then, just in paragraph 15, the Buddha says to Ambalatthika, he says, in that case, go into Savatthi and say to that woman, Sister, since I was born, I do not recall that I have ever intentionally deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be well. Then Angulimala says to the Buddha, he says, Bhante, in that case, wouldn't I be telling a deliberate lie? For I have intentionally killed many living beings. But then the Buddha said, the Buddha had a different intention in mind when he said that, which wasn't made explicit. And so the way Angulimala understood it, if he were to say that, make that statement, he would be telling a deliberate lie. And so the Buddha then expresses his intention explicitly. He says, then go into Savatthi and say to that woman, Sister, since I was born with a noble birth, I do not recall that I have ever intentionally deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be well. Then Angulimala goes into the city, he goes up to the woman, he makes that statement, and then the woman has an easy childbirth, and the infant is well, and the woman becomes well. I think this was before, at least according to the sutta, before Angulimala became an arhat, but perhaps already he was a sotapanna, so he was a nobleman. Okay, so now we move to the next part of the sutta, which introduces a shift in emphasis just from speech to all aspects of one's conduct, and it places the emphasis on reflecting before acting. And again, the Buddha uses an analogy to convey his point. He speaks about using a mirror. So he asks Rahula, what is the purpose of a mirror? And Rahula replies, it's for the purpose of reflection. And just conveniently, in both Pali and in English, the word reflection can have two meanings. One is the meaning of something, a visible impression gets bounced back from another surface. And in thought, one considers something, contemplates it before acting upon it. Okay, so Rahula says the mirror is used for the purpose of reflection. And so the Buddha then says, in the same way, Rahula, an action with the body should be done after repeated reflection. An action of speech should be done after repeated reflection. An action in mind should be done after repeated reflection. Okay, then the Buddha is going to extend this kind of reflection. In this first paragraph, he just applies it to the present, when one is about to act, by body, speech, or thought, one reflects on that action before acting. Now the Buddha is going to extend that process of reflection to the 3 periods of time. So in paragraph 9 he says, when you wish to do an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. And now he's going to show exactly how one reflects on it. Would this action that I want to do with the body lead to my own affliction, my own harm, to the harm of others, or to the harm of both of us? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? Okay, when you reflect, if you know that the action is going to be harmful to yourself, to others, to both, that it's an unwholesome bodily action that will bring painful results, then you definitely should not do that action with the body. But when you reflect, if you know that the action won't have any harmful effects on oneself or others, then you can do that action with the body. Okay, so that is the way that one reflects before engaging in the action. But now, in paragraph 10, the Buddha explains how one reflects as one is engaging in the action. So while you're doing an action with the body, this is if a little boy back in Brooklyn, 52nd Street in Brooklyn, as he was pulling out the $5 from his mother's pocketbook. Okay, while you are doing an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Okay, one reflects upon it in the same way. And then, if you realize that it's going to be harmful to oneself or others, then you should suspend such a bodily action. Then one stops in the process. As one is doing it, one stops and sort of short circuits the action before completing it. But when you reflect, if you know that this action won't bring any harm to oneself or to others, then you can continue such a bodily action. Okay, now paragraph 11 is the way to reflect upon an action that has been completed. So after you have done an action with the body, then you reflect upon that action thus. Did the action that I did with the body lead to my own affliction, to the harm of others, to the harm of both? Was it an unwholesome action with painful consequences, painful results? Okay, if you see that that action did lead to one's harm or to the harm of others, then, here the Buddha is speaking in a monastic context, he says, then you should confess such a bodily action, reveal it, and lay it open or expose it to the teacher or to your wise companions in the holy life. So this is a process that the Buddha laid down for monks and nuns who have committed unwholesome actions, that go against actions against the precepts. In order to be clear to them, one confesses them to another monk, to another nun. Okay, having confessed it and so forth, then you should undertake restraint for the future. So you confess the action in order to clear oneself of the transgression, and then one makes a determination to restrain oneself in the future. Okay, but after committing that action, when you reflect back on it, if you see that it wasn't harmful in any way, then you can abide happy and glad, training day and night in wholesome states. Okay, the next paragraph repeats the same thing regarding actions of speech. So the next few paragraphs just repeat the same thing for actions of speech. Then 15 repeats the same thing for actions of mind, except that there is a difference. I think I pointed it out in the note. I should have had it in the text. In note 639. The difference is that in the case of mind, since it's a purely mental action, not something which is done bodily or verbally, one doesn't confess it for the monk or nun, one doesn't confess it to another monk or nun. But rather, one should feel repelled, humiliated, maybe that's not a good word, repelled, ashamed, and disgusted by that mental action. And having done that, then one sets up restraint over the mind in the future. So when an action, when it's a purely thought or emotion that one is feeling, if you have to confess every unwholesome thought or emotion, it could be that you go on confessing over and over and it just becomes an annoyance for oneself or others. But instead one sets up a sense of shame or a sense of repugnance towards the unwholesome thought, and then exercises restraint over one's thoughts in the future. Okay, then paragraph 18 is a kind of summation or declaration about this process of reflection, a broadening or extension of it. The Buddha says, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past purified their bodily action, verbal action, and mental action, all did so by repeatedly reflecting in this way. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will purify their bodily action, verbal action, mental action. They will all do so by reflecting thus. And whatever recluses and Brahmins at present are purifying their bodily, verbal, mental action, they are all doing so by repeatedly reflecting thus. And therefore you should train thus We will purify our bodily action, verbal action, and mental action by repeatedly reflecting upon them. And one, or at least a few practical ways to go about this process of reflection, to apply it in your daily life. And that is, in the course of the day, if you do anything that you consider to be wrong or unwholesome by body or by speech, especially by body or speech, then at the end of the day you review your behavior and just make a mental note of the unwise bodily action, unwise verbal action, and make a determination to refrain from it in the future. If it's something really heavy that weighs on your mind, then you can, if you have like a fellow Dhamma practitioner, then you can speak about it with them in order to get the weight of it off your mind. But if it's just matters that are a bit, that others would consider trifling, but that are upsetting you or disturbing you, what you can do, if you do like an evening devotional service, or just go before a Buddha statue in your home shrine, and you could do a confession of this before the Buddha, saying, Bhante, I have committed this, not this Bhante, but Bhante the Buddha. But Lord Buddha, I have committed such and such unwholesome actions. Please, of course we don't have the Buddha forgiving like a god, but please accept my repentance for this, and I determine that I'll refrain in the future.
12 Hail Marys.
Excuse me?
12 Hail Marys.
Yeah.
We don't get to joke.
Say it again.
12 Hail Marys.
12, I see 12 Hail Marys. Please do.
So it seems...
Yeah, take the microphone.
It seems like in this latter way of reflection, we have a conundrum of the Nazi case. It's being kind of answered in this way of reflecting.
Oh, that's a good point, John.
It doesn't have... You are not really lying, you are looking at the consequences.
That's a very, very good way to put it. Yeah. Because in this process of reflection, you're really examining what are the consequences of an action that I'm going to take when I'm caught in this dilemma. Any questions now? Okay. Go away. You take the microphone.
Is it true that in the whole Nikayas, the essence of unwholesomeness is the wholesomeness itself? Because you say if I don't do something bodily bad to others, to myself or to both, then I would abide in happiness and the wholesome state. So it's a passive wholesomeness.
I don't think so. It's just that in the Indian way of expressing things, there's a kind of fondness for using the negation of things that are considered bad or unwholesome in order to suggest what could also be positively good. Like the three roots of the wholesome are alobha, adosa, amoha, which is literally translated non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. But those also imply positive qualities. Like non-greed can imply generosity or giving to others. Non-hatred will imply patience, loving-kindness, compassion. Non-delusion implies wisdom, insight, understanding.
In real practice, there is a gap for a person who is engaged in saving lives, for example, for whales, or a person who stays at home whales, like the big whales in the ocean. Somebody has to take actions to save them.
Oh, I see.
Engage.
Yeah.
It's kind of action put into action.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there are many other suttas or teachings of the Buddha which speak about different types of positive, wholesome action.
What are they?
Excuse me?
What are those suttas?
Well, there's the ones that speak about giving. Well, morality is explained often as abstaining from this, abstaining from that. But developing, like loving kindness, the 4 Brahmaviharas, the 4 divine abodes, practicing patience.
And those just mental contemplation?
Well, I think they'll also be expressed in action. Okay, I have an internet question or two. Actually, it looks like the second one is...
just already answered. I think you just already answered.
But this is a continuation of this.
Yeah, but
it seems that it's almost the same one.
Already answered.
Would it be correct to say that wholesome in Buddhism is defined as anything that is not unwholesome, and the unwholesome is anything that has greed, ill will, and delusion as the intention? So wholesome must be free from greed, ill will, and ignorance. I mean, that much is true, but it doesn't mean that that just sort of sitting in a state of passive quiescence is itself, the fulfillment of the wholesome. And the first question here, what about the issues with moral absolutism versus moral relativism? Where does Buddhism stand versus Catholic and Muslims? I think the question is a little bit beyond my scope, right, ability to answer. Okay, I think we'll have to stop now and break for the lunch period. Then we'll come back for the lunch. And after our discussion, I'm going to need some people to help to put away all of the tables and to reset the meditation cushions here, because there's going to be a meditation retreat starting tonight. Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Sharing the merits is something wholesome, no? In fact, there are 10 bases of meritorious action that are spoken about: giving, moral observance, cultivation, development, meditation, service or helpfulness to others, showing respect and reverence to others, listening to the Dhamma, teaching the Dhamma, sharing merits with others, rejoicing in the merits of others, and straightening out one's views or understanding. So those are 10 positive actions. Okay, so let us share the merits with the Devas, the Bhutas or fierce spirits, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, and with all beings. Akasa taj bhumata deva naga mahidika punyanta nanamoditva Chiran Rakantu Sasana Akasa Taj Bhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyanta Nagamo Dipa Chiran Rakantu Desana Akasa Taj Bhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyanta Nagamo Dipa Chiran Rakantu Manparam Etavatacha Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam. Do it the short way. Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Bhudanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Sadanumodantu. Sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya vichihitato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya samino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibhutin. Okay, then we stand, we do 3 vows to the Buddha. Before we do that, I should mention that I brought some of the catalogs that I keep on getting, even though I wrote to them as LLD, and I said, please stop sending me the catalog. And they said, yes, we'll take you off the list, but I still get their winter catalog. So if anybody wants that catalog, I'll put them here. And also there's a magazine that's called Inquiring Mind. They have me write a column for each issue, and then they sent me some excess copies. So I'll put them here also. So anybody who wants can pick them up. Okay, so we end with 3 vows.
Vow to abundance.